Had you ever been to a conclave before? Was that your first conclave as well?
I was there when Francis was elected. Okay, I was a seminarian, so I was wearing black and a Roman collar.
Wow.
It's spending time there studying at the Regina Apostolorum in Rome, and we got the notification just like you had with Cardinal Prevost, and we all ran down to the square. I think I ran about 2 miles and hitchhiked the rest of the way, and was there the moment when Pope Francis came out. So, not my first time, but truly never gets old.
What would you say? And just my own curiosity, was there much difference between the two? Was there a sense of difference? I mean, obviously with Benedict, being alive, there was certainly controversy just swirling around the entire appointment, saying how can we have sort of two popes at once? But what difference would you say between Francis and Leo?
Definitely a difference. In some ways, in other ways, not. I mean, you had, of course, back February 2013, you had the Benedict resigned, the first time in roughly like 500 years that a Catholic pontiff resigns from the papacy, and then that iconic shot of him flying away in a helicopter over to Castel Gandolfo in the distance, and it was like, okay, we're without a pope, but he's still alive, but we're without a pope. And then just about a month later, March 13th, is when Pope Francis is elected, right? Jorge Bergoglio. Initially, not so much of a difference, but then as we saw, what I believe, as do others, that this was one of the most uh, devastating pontificates really in the history of the Catholic Church on so many different levels. You probably would agree, Jack, in some respect, not only doctrinally on what happened, just if you're a Catholic and you care about these issues, the obfuscation of doctrine, marriage and the family, the Eucharist, the blessing of same-sex couples, you name it. You got that, but then you also have the geopolitical side. And I know we're going to get into that. It's one of your fields of expertise with the whole unholy alliance with the Chinese Communist Party and what that did. And then, of course, the sexual cover-ups, people like McCarrick, Father Rupnick. So devastating in a lot of ways. So this current conclave that we just had, it was extremely important, not only for the church, but for the world.
Well, and John, the biggest issue when we look at all of this, and where you saw Pope Francis and President Trump getting into it, was this issue of illegal immigration and the issue of borders. And Francis would come out. And by the way, I've always tried to be fair and say that Francis also did hold the line on abortion. He held the line
That's true.
on war. He was anti-war. So I've always tried to be fair. And every time I talk about him, I say I'm going to say this as well, because it wasn't sort of a left versus right kind of dichotomy. It doesn't really work that way when it comes to world leaders, but he does wade into politics. But by the way, John, let's actually dispel something for people too who are not Catholic, because we get this all the time. When the Pope is speaking out on political issues, is that something that all Catholics have to follow, or is that simply a bishop giving his opinion?
It's given his opinion, right? So an infallible
Exactly.
statement has a very specific formula that needs to be uttered when he is speaking. It also has to be in line with what previous pontiffs have always and everywhere taught, okay? Previous popes. He can't just make up anything he wants on faith and morals. And last but not least is it must be rooted in sacred scripture. So those three benchmarks are really define an infallible statement from the Pope. So when he talks about a political issue, an opinion, we're not, we're required to give it respect, but we don't have to have our firm belief behind that statement, right? Because he gave off the cuff remarks all the time. And I don't know, Jack, even like, okay, what do you think about this? So he was super strong on the abortion issue. He had statements like, someone who gets an abortion is like hiring a hitman. Typical Pope Francis, just super blunt, right? But at the same time, he hires, or he puts in charge of the Pontifical Academy for Life. This is kind of like the think tank of the Vatican, where they study issues of marriage, life, family. They produce documents. Think of it like Heritage Foundation, but for the Catholic Church, right? And the guy in charge of it is Archbishop Paglia, a guy who thought that abortion in Italy was a great thing to have, and it was part of justice of society. So he's the Pope of paradoxes. On one hand, he says these statements, But on the other hand, his actions often do something else, which I'm grateful that Pope Leo, one of the first acts he just did in terms of appointments, is he replaced Archbishop Paglia and named Cardinal Reina, who is much more orthodox, to head the Pontifical Academy for Life.